This is being recorded just so we can have this available on our website for future audiences. And so I'll try to keep Allison's video on Spotlight and we'll have it recorded. So if you want to put questions in the chat, and also we have a small group, so feel free to unmute and have a conversation, but I think it'll just be Allison that will be recorded. So we'll have that as well. And yeah, I'm excited to have Allison tonight. Just being a part of Penn State with your experience with early childhood and fascinating background. So I'll let you share more about that. And we'll get into that obviously with a small group. Hopefully we'll have a wonderful conversation, and I'll share out at the end, I'll save time. We'll have a short survey, just ask you to fill out, which really helps us develop the programs and continue offering more webinars for families and educators. So yeah, I'll let Allison kind of take us into that too.
Well, sure. I was going to talk about in a second about who I am, but first for me, I wanted to kind of open this up as to who we are and what some of the concerns are. And I love that we have a small group because we can really dive deeply into what some of the questions and the concerns are specifically. I have an outline, and I have a lot of my stories from my research and a lot of the literature on children and media, depending on what we're interested in. So if it works, we'll just kind of have a dance here. So if I can kind of start with everybody about who we are, I'm happy to start, and then I'm going to come back to what are some of our key concerns that we bring, because I think everybody comes for a reason. And for me, it's really helpful to know why are we here. And so if I can get this, to work. So I'm Allison Henward. I'm an associate professor of early childhood education at Penn State. I have a couple different lines of research, but the vast majority of my early research has been on media, young children, learning, and curriculum in preschools. I'm a parent, and I'm a former preschool and elementary school teacher. And so I really got interested in children and media. I think both from being a teacher and from being a parent, and I was interested in how preschools became these spaces of conflict and these spaces of children's interests and parents' interests and adult interests, and everybody wanting to know what was the best way to go about things. So I use Courtney Sherbein, who's another media researcher, that children's encounters with popular culture have been this source of agitation and concern in preschools. So for me, I wanted to know, what role did they serve in preschools? How did children learn with and from media? And what role does it play in their lives? I think from being a preschool teacher and an elementary school teacher, it was something that was so important to so many children. And it was something that I felt caused a lot of anxiety for parents. And so for me and for teachers alike. And so it was this really interesting thing for me to research. And so I've been researching this on and off for the past 15 years and I'm trained as an ethnographer and educational anthropologist. So I look at how this happens in context. So that's who I am. And I've been at Penn State for about 5 years, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk to y'all. So thank you. I can turn it over to everybody. Just who are you? Why are you here? And what are your main concerns? And I'll just kind of write them down.
I can start us off. And I think I muted everyone, so just feel free to unmute yourself. But I am Sarah Hamilton. I'm the education program manager with wpsu. And I'm very interested with a young child, as well as in the education field with children, of how to balance that. The media, it's such a rich tool, but how much is too much? And or are we being overly concerned about that as well? So just excited to hear about that balance.
Thank you. Others? Thanks, Sarah. I know we have, let's see, Shanae and Shelly. Anybody?
Can I start? But just to let you know, I'm leaving campus and then they just practicing the music. So you might just hear the sound. But so I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Georgia and I'm studying about young children's place in space. But the media is always a fascinating topic for me to dig in. And then I know about the Dr. Henward's research, and then I really want to hear more about in this situation under pandemic, how young children use the media, and then I think the parents' concern and anxiety is getting more worse under this situation. So I want to hear all of your thoughts and idea, what you think about it. So yeah, it's so good to be here, and thank you for the Penn State University.
Thank you for joining us.
I'll go next. My name is Tamra, and I also work at WPSU as an event coordinator. I am a mother of 4 adult children, but I also have a 15-month-old granddaughter, and I'm finding it very fascinating, the difference in how my daughter is parenting her daughter around screens and television and the media, as opposed to how I parented. You know, she was born, my daughter, first one was born in 1985, and then I had kids all the way up through 1999. And so having a little one that was born in 2019, how different that is 20 years later. And the way that young parents today see media and TV and screens, I thought really nothing about plopping my kids in front of Sesame Street and some of the other, you know, educational kids programs. I felt good about it. And now she's very, very limiting in even how much Sesame Street she allows her. And that is consequently the only thing she's allowed her to watch. But that's very fascinating to me. And then as I was sharing with Dr. Henward earlier, I just got accepted to graduate school where I'm going to be studying curriculum and instruction. And so this is also very interesting to me.
Thank you. Yay. And that's, I love that when those worlds intersect of, well, parent and educator and also the generational differences.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, we have Melanie's on, but not sure. Shelly, can you share with us? Oh, I think you're muted. Can we unmute you? Let me see.
Shelly, I think I have to ask to unmute you. I can't just unmute you. If...
Yeah, I did it. Sorry. Sorry. I'm an instructional aide at Bedford Elementary, and I've been working there for, well, I've been doing this for about 15 to 16 years. And I work with 3rd grade mostly. And like I said, I have 4 grandchildren. So I see a lot of myself, like Tamra said, a lot of changes in the media. But for me, it's amazing to me how my grandkids know how to use the iPad. Like my 2-year-old granddaughter knows how to use it. But I also see a lot of things with my kids at school that aren't always so good. And I worry about that side of the media and technology.
Absolutely. So I'm hearing both affordances, but also concerns about, and can I ask a little bit when are you talking, well, I should ask, when you're talking about concerns at school?
When you, it's not been as bad now, but you know, when you see kids getting on things maybe they shouldn't be getting on, and they know how to get on to things, like you know, we were doing the Zooms through virtual, and just seeing some of the inappropriate things they know that we don't know always, you know, and they know how to get into it. Or I guess that would be my biggest concern. And I don't want to see my grandchildren getting into the wrong things.
Right. Right. And concerns about content. Makes sense. Well, I think
Yes.
absolutely. And I'm not sure if Melanie can hear us, but just give a second.
Yeah, so Daniela or
Mine jumped, my at least jumped off. So do we have Daniela? Thank you.
yeah.
Oh, yes, we do. Daniela. Do we have anybody else?
And one other, Jay Slunker, but Daniela said she's in the middle of dinner time, which completely
No
understood.
problem. No, exactly. It's, we were saying it's always a hard time. Well, we can talk for a little bit and then people come in and come out. I think, well, some of the issues that, and the concerns that people brought up and also the interests are all things that surround media, and they surround young children, they surround media. And when I first spoke with WPSU about doing this webinar, it was related to one of our classic questions about media and learning and young children. And the reason that it's become more and more important and more focused is because we know we've had an unprecedented year. We've had many children that are at home. We have had many children that are at home when parents and family members are still working. And whether they're working in person away from the home or whether they're working at home, there are, it's a different world. I say as a parent, my children used to go away to school for a while and now they're not. So it's become more of a digital world. So I think that it's something that's become increasingly that people have focused on, but this is nothing new. So the concerns about media, the concerns about children, they are not new. And in a lot of the history of media, they're not even this generation. We've always had concerns about media. People used to have concerns about comic books in the 20s and 30s. So we've always had some concern about something. As an anthropologist, my concern is not whether something is good or bad, but what people do with it. And that's what I think I want to start this webinar with, is that we always need to focus what people are doing with media. And oftentimes we think about this with adults, but I want to challenge everybody that this is something really important to look at for super young children. So I'm going to be, oh, hi, Melanie. Do you want to, I can stop for a second. We're just talking about kind of perspectives, but thinking of children in media and some of the issues that were brought up. And one of the things that I would like everybody to keep in mind is what are young children and what are adults doing with media? And that can answer some of our other questions that come up about time or content, because those often are not as important as what's happening with the media when they observe it. Okay. So can I stop for a second? And Melanie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? We have a small group, so we're just going to talk.
Or I was trying to find a quiet place in my house. I'm a preschool teacher at Chestnut Ridge, and I find I have a few kids that kind of have no, they have free reign of the internet. I have them watching inappropriate things, talking about what they've seen. And it's kind of scary that they have that ability, and the inappropriate things that they're seeing and talking about, and they don't know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
I have two children myself, a 16 and a 14, so I monitor their usage closely.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that thank you so much for and do you teach fours, threes, fives?
They're fours.
Wonderful. I'm always happy when we have early childhood people. I think one of the questions that's coming up once again about content and about access. In many ways, access has expanded, but in other ways it hasn't. So hopefully we can talk about this. I'm really going to focus on what are some of the benefits and what are the things that can happen with media? What are some of the things that we should be aware of? And what can we do as big people to our little people in terms of learning and guiding? So that's how I'm thinking about this, but I really did want to open it up to have a dialogue and to make sure that if we have questions or there are concerns, or we're thinking about this in light of pandemics or from a teacher role, that there's space for that too. So that works for everybody. So I mentioned who I am, but I wanted to start with, and this is a field note from some of my earliest research. And I mentioned that I was a teacher in Arizona. And so this was a preschool that was actually in the school district in which I taught. And so I'll read the first one. I'll have somebody else hopefully read. So 4-year-old Javier, a dual language learner of Spanish and English, arrives at school early one December morning. So his teacher, Miss Garcia, notices that he's wearing a Spiderman costume. Miss Garcia has observed him closely since the beginning of the year. And when I spoke with her, she said, oh, he doesn't really talk to anybody. And many of the children spoke Spanish and English. So she knew it wasn't a communication or a language concern. This was a child that just kept to himself. And she noticed that on the playground or in the classroom, he never really interacted with any other children. And even though they shared language capabilities. And so can I have, Melanie, would you read for me? Or can I actually have anybody volunteer to read for me? I don't want to
I
tell people
can.
about it. Okay.
On this day, when he walks into the classroom, Gabriella and Michael immediately approach him. They begin talking animatedly, asking him about his Spider-Man costume. Oh. Wait, their photos are in the way here. Hold on.
I can, sorry.
There we go. And inviting him to play. Javier joins them in the dramatic play center and they play together until cleanup time. From this day on, Javier wears his costume to school each day and plays Spider-Man during free time and guided play. Through playing Spider-Man, Javier builds his positive self-concept, social skills, and develops his Spanish and English language proficiency. The children's common interest in Spider-Man has opened the door for Javier. He is talking, negotiating, and relating to children in new ways.
That's right. I use this, thank you so much, by the way. I use this to introduce the idea of what do children do by media? What do they do with media? What do we mean by media? How does it appear? Because a lot of times we think about media as being a screen, and especially during the pandemic and coronavirus, it's very much about the screen, and that's where a lot of the concerns. But as we're noticing, it also has to do with what the content is. And I use this because this is something that happens every day in preschools. And this was an example of a teacher using a child's capabilities and interests and doing it to support him. So this is kind of the glass half full approach to it of what can happen when we leverage media. And of course, there's concerns about media. I am not a person that decides that media is great. And if you speak to my own children, they think it's hilarious that I study media, and then yet sometimes they're like, I'm not sure you like media. So I said, well, no, I'm not unabashedly, right? Because it's a tool just like anything else. It depends on how we use it. And so my question is, how are you using it? So I guess I'm asking, what do we mean by media? And so I'm going to turn this over to you, to everybody when we think about media. I've given you some ideas of how I think about media from this example and through our conversations. But if we were to brainstorm, what do we think about when we think about media? I'm just going to put you guys in groups, but I can just kind of write it down too.
I used to think about media being newspapers and magazines, but we don't really see those in print anymore.
That's a great point. Okay, I'm writing it. So Tamra said newspapers and magazines, absolutely.
It's kind of going along with that too, of just, I guess, any content that's kind of outside content. I'm thinking of like media literacy and trying to value what content you're receiving. So whether it's internet, news, TV, social media, yeah, all this like outside content.
Absolutely. rest of the crowd? Do you agree? Are there different ideas as to what you think about when we're thinking about media? You know, I threw out comic books earlier, and I've heard newspapers and magazines and media literacy. So what else are we thinking about when we think about media?
Video games, would they be considered media?
They are. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. Video games. Mhm.
Movie or cinema can be a media.
Yeah, movies and cinema. Mhm. Those of you that are parents, grandparents, what else do we?
Would we still consider books media, just like storybooks?
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
YouTube. is
Absolutely.
something that comes to my mind. Yeah.
Absolutely. So YouTube, and YouTube as a media source.
Mhm.
Okay. And is that, you had mentioned that the children are speaking about that. Are you thinking YouTube is what they're talking about?
What was that again?
Melanie, so when you were speaking about the children in your class, is YouTube one form of media that you're thinking?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking at this, video games, YouTube, storybooks, newspapers, magazines, movies, cinema, absolutely. So you're seeing these are things all over the place. These are, and so what I'm seeing from your definitions, this is multimodal, meaning that it can be a movie, it can be it can be print, it can be a whole lot of things. And
Maybe even music, right?
Mhm.
So even songs that they would hear. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And texts and songs. And also when you're thinking about it, those texts and songs sometimes go with things like cartoons or media. So I have a child that likes anime but does not speak Japanese, but associates it and knows the meaning because of the movies. So often these are multi-platform too. And so the reason, and I love this about brainstorming this idea about what do we mean by media? Because a lot of times when we talk about media, we're talking about something very specific, or we're talking about screens. But I like to open up the idea of it's a whole, it's many, many things. And I missed over who mentioned the idea of, about Tamra, about was it newspaper and magazines?
Yeah.
Right. But now as adults, how do a lot of adults consume news?
On my
phones,
iPhone.
as do children. So I think it's really important that we see sometimes how we think media should be. And that I also think about what do these bring up? And I do this a lot because we have these pre-existing ideas about what media, if it's good or bad, because we hear this a lot. And even when I've spoken with people for popular press, they've said, oh, well, is it good or bad? And it's hard because I said, well, it depends. Well, no, how much is good? How much is bad? And I said, well, it depends on, it's like, what you're eating depends on what you're eating and how much, and it depends on, how much you exercise, right? To use that analogy, but it depends. And so that's what I would like people to do as we move forward, is to think about, it's really about its use. And that's what we would call sociocultural. We think about it, that this is a tool like anything else. So, now, this is also my space to, what are the ways and the concerns that we hear about children and screens? When I think about the ways of thinking about screens, what are people concerned about? Either when I asked, why did we come here? But we also, even if we don't have these concerns, we have these ideas swirling around us as to what are the good and the bad things about screens. And you've mentioned a couple. But is there anything we haven't mentioned? I should say, can you please give me something we haven't mentioned?
TikTok.
Mhm.
I'm just saying that because a few of my kids, and I don't know anything about it,
Mhm.
but a lot of the kids talk about that, and I'm surprised.
Mhm.
Just because I don't know if it's good or bad.
Right, the platform of TikTok, absolutely. Absolutely. So, and TikTok, and when we think about screens, or so that can be about, well, I'm not, what I'm hearing of, I may not be as familiar with some of the things that the children are talking about, so that's a little uncomfortable to me. I don't want to put words in your mouth. But I think that that's something I hear a lot. Are there anything, are other concerns about about screens and media?
We just had someone else join. Ashley put it in the chat, so I'll just share it out. But she mentioned, which I agree, talking about screen addiction worries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that adjustment. I was just thinking about that for my young one of like when we turn off the TV is like not a great time, like how to balance that transition.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
What about the actual concerns about the physical concerns about the blue light or the, like my daughter tells me, if you're going to let her watch any Sesame Street, make sure there's none after 6 o'clock because we want that 2-hour window before she goes to bed, where she's not seeing any screens because they think it's overstimulating or something. I don't know. But, this is all the stuff that young parents today are reading and hearing they should or shouldn't do.
Well, and these are definitely, and I say these are anxieties. I can't always speak to all of these because my research doesn't investigate these particular things, but these are things, and I think it depends on how they're being. And from a research standpoint, it's a different type of question. But from an anthropological standpoint, I always think, well, children grow up in a lot of different environments. And with a lot of different things and a lot of different times. But and there's a lot of, with parenting, there's a lot more information now, and there's a lot more anxiety, and there's a lot more work around it. So when we look in past generations, and that particularly happens with some parents and not with others. So, but these are things that swirl in our heads. And so I wanted to talk about what the two things, and when I think about the versions about media, and this is overly simplistic. So, but I asked my youngest and she said, well, you have to put a zombie. So the two versions in which we think about children and screens, and this comes from really media literacy. We'll get people like Donna Alverman, they'll talk about it, and Julian Sefton Green and David Buckingham about the versions, and Joe Tobin's about the two different versions of children and media. And the first one that we hear a lot is about children as consumers, right? That we can't break them away, that they get addicted, that they can't help themselves, or that no matter what, everything that they see, they just internalize, and they're kind of powerless against this very, very strong force of media. And that's one model of childhood. And when I was talking about why, while children, if we're talking about the 20s and 30s and concerns about comic books and, why they were kept behind counters, was well, it's going to corrupt children. But that also comes from this idea of a different idea about children. But one of the ways in which I think about it, and this goes with what do they do about it, there's another idea, and it's about children as producers. And when I think about producers, it's what do they do with it? What happens? And the idea of source material comes from Ann Dyson, who's a wonderful early childhood literacy researcher. And much like I might take a character from a famous book and it'll swirl in my head, and I'm going to write a story about it 4 years later. Let's say whether it was, Peter Pan, or whether it was Tom Sawyer, somebody that it's going to be very, there's a very iconic character. children do the same thing with media. It becomes source material that they can use and they can mix in different ways. And we often don't think about it that way, but I always encourage parents to think about what can they do with it, how do they use it, and how does it become a tool. But just like a child learns to use a tool by being with people around them, if you want to teach a child how to cook, oftentimes they're going to need a person that's more knowledgeable around them, whether it's a family member, a sibling, a friend, and we'll show them how to do that. That is something that we need to do too. So we also need to be there to scaffold and to help children. But what I always ask people to do is think about the possibilities, what can be created also. And that's either in discussion, or it can be, hey, I'm watching this because I enjoy this, but I might relate this to something later. And I also think it's very important. Well, it's becoming more common. I had a person point out to me one time, a lot of times we don't question adults if they want to watch a football game, or we don't question adults if they want to do something else, but we question children for it. And for me, it's really important to understand that the same way that I can watch something for entertainment, children can too. So that's not, giving everybody carte blanche, but it's also, as I will say, the idea that children are people too. And we all use media for a variety of different things. So once again, children are people too. How are children using it? What are they doing about it? And then as adults, the number one thing, and this is more addressed with teachers, but also parents that are looking for more explicit learning opportunities, about ways in which we can help children and build upon their interests and bridge it into other forms. And so also bridging it into writing, if they have ideas and characters they like, bridging it into drawing, and drawing not just as a medium that's important all to itself, to art, blocks and play. And I will share, hopefully if we have time, I will share some research that's coming with one of my colleagues out of Korea, where a little child uses YouTube and he watches them and he plays with, but then he uses YouTube videos to get the English word, but then he mixes it in. And you see the sophistication of what happens and how a little boy learns in the middle of a lockdown. Now, I liked this. This is not mine. I completely stole it from the internet. But the other feats of extreme parenting, which I like, or extreme family members. I'm going to skip over this, but also the idea of what children do with it is, there's big connections between popular culture and literacy, and media and literacy. And this is both how they use it in more traditional writing, but also on literacy play. And some researchers like Karen Wolin do really wonderful work around this. And so I kind of wanted to talk just about the possibilities. And so this is what I was talking with my colleague, Pulip Dong, was talking about with research she's been doing about a little boy, and he loves cars. And so he plays cars, and he's not even 3, and he runs around cars, but then he has to go to YouTube and he uses it as a resource, much like earlier generations might have run to the actual encyclopedia to look something up, or they might have run over to a magazine because that was the way that they would get information. But when he wants to see it, and also when he wants to engage his family members, he will go and he will ask them to turn it on, but then he brings them in and he wants them to play. But it's very interesting. He wanted them to watch it so they would know about the characters and about so the sophistication of a not quite 3-year-old knowing that you had to have a shared understanding, that you had to be able to do that. And you could, if you didn't know the word, you could go onto YouTube to do that, to work with his grandfather. Blew us away. So I think it's always really important to say also what happens. And if we pay attention to that, the sophistication, yeah, that's not heat, but I do have some, just some recommendations on media literacy, that this is the other part, because not everything that kids see is great. And I kept hearing this. This is not the case. And it can be about content, but a lot of times I do stuff on critical media literacy. And I see we have let's call it, but Dr. Patterson here, who does critical race media literacy. And these are important things, because a lot of the representations we see are not okay for many people, and for me in terms of justice. And so having conversations with young children and getting them equipped, especially now where everything is on the internet, to be able to say, we start critical media literacy at 3, where we can determine, okay, where's this coming from? What's the message? Why might somebody do this? And oftentimes people think, well, young children really can't do this. I'm going to jump over, but we know that they can. And so using questions of, and it's hard because children, I always say you have to sit with them, because especially imagine if the thing that you loved more than anything else, and somebody comes in and is like, I know you want to talk about that, but I don't like it and it's horrible. You kind of shut down. But if you sit next to them, you go, this is kind of interesting. And then you say, okay, oh, I wonder why they have, and I used to do this with my young children. I wonder why they're only showing people with light skin on there. I wonder why. Why do you think that? I wonder what else they could do. Do you think that that's what you see in the world, right? And so I can pose these questions to kind of get those wheels turning with very, very young children. And me posing questions, well, why would they do that? I'm not sure that's the nicest way that you could describe somebody. And these are things where I won't give children answers, but I will open the door to critically question. And I do it by modeling. I don't think that, I'm not sure I think that was very fair. Do you think that might have been fair? What? Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't think it was fair either. What do you think would have been fair? And getting them to think about alternatives, getting them to think about ideas beyond what they see, and getting them to understand very early that not everything they see is reality. Because one of the concerns people have of, oh, well, they see it and it just is. Well, a lot of times I say that's our job as more knowledgeable others to step in and say, well, let's give them the tools in order to think about that, because that's what we have, and a lot of children do. And so what we found, if I can share one more thing before conversations, is from an earlier research study that I did with literacy researcher Donna Grace. We showed 7-year-old children, and this was in Honolulu, Hawaii, commercials. And we showed them commercials and we showed them videos. And we wanted to know, what did they know about media literacy? And what we were really surprised, because they were very savvy. And so they knew who made commercials. And I love their responses. And I always want to, my favorite is, companies like McDonald's, and my dad makes commercials. And so they, the children knew, that through conversations that somebody had to have made those commercials, that they weren't just reality. And then when we asked them, well, why do people make commercials? They knew, oh, it's so you buy things. And you could hear their conversations and they knew it. But they used the magic key and the Lucky Charms, which I don't know if they still put that in the Lucky Charms, but I need to find out. And then maybe they want more money, like $10,000. But these kids are 7. And then I won't go into all of it, but I have the link. The most interesting thing is we showed them representations in which there were stereotypical representations of Kanaka Maoli, Indigenous Hawaiian surfers, and they were portrayed as the bad guys in this movie. And one of the groups of children were Indigenous Hawaiian. and their local experience, they thought that the people that made the movie were crazy. And they said, there must be something wrong with that director, because their experiences taught them that wasn't the case. So I say that the conversations that we have at home and kids' local experiences, they matter. And they matter a lot for how children come into the world. So whether we're preschool teachers, whether we're parents, and a lot of that can just happen by sitting down and watching with them. And it's, may not always be our favorite thing. I've seen, anime is probably not my top of the list, but it, is very important to somebody that I love. And so she and I watch it. And you find out the connections they make, and then you find out how they're connecting to other stories. So when you listen, you find not just the sophistication, but where you can step in. And one of the hardest things, I think, is not to, as parents or as family members, or we often are caught up in this idea of what children are and what media. But I think it's also important to know that even when we hear things that we might go, we have to listen a little bit deeper. So we did a research study in Memphis, Tennessee, and it was in 2011, but we published it in 2013. And there was this brilliant girl, 5 years old, and she starts talking to us and telling us these stories. And I'm listening, and she talks about a monster, and then she talks about Hannah Montana and talk about it. And then she talks about Boots from Dora the Explorer. And she creates this huge, just very intricate story. And I was amazed by how this child took this source material from about 5 different things and put it all together in this new configuration to tell the story. And I think about that as children come to, kindergarten and first grade and preschool. We dictate their stories because we know that it's pre-read. We know that those are literacy practices. So we also have to listen to these as literacy practices too. So that's where kind of I want to stop, because I write and talk about from my experiences and my research, and I don't tend to comment on anything I don't have research knowledge about. And I might say, ooh, that you might want to look to that. But that being said, what new questions do we have, or what do these experiences spark things for us? Go ahead and stop that. These brought other things to mind, either in classrooms or research or anything?
I'll just share, we had a great comment saying, someone said, I hear you sharing, being that our kids are geniuses in their own rights. We just have to give them the opportunity to show us.
Oh,
that's very true.
Thank you. It's not easy, and especially in during the pandemic and during coronavirus, and in the US, we don't have the safety net that a lot of countries do. And so everybody's stretched thin. Family members, teachers, and especially in this group, and also we have a bunch of Wonder Women and a couple of Wonder Men that are doing this work. And everybody is stretched really thin, but there is something, and this is what I've been so thrilled with as a researcher, is as a teacher, I'm not sure I had as much time, but as a researcher, I could, and even as a parent, I may not have as much time, but I could sit down and I could listen. And when I really sat down and I really listened, I was pretty amazed. And so I think the thing is, going back to the question about, screen addiction worries, there are, and I know with neuroscientists and everything, I mean, for me, I also have some, what's my word? I also have some resources. There's a great one I know from a colleague of mine at University of Texas, Austin. And we think about this with early childhood, just knowing that it is one way children learn. The problem becomes me saying, Me saying that there are benefits and that children can and do learn is one thing, and it's true. But I also want to reiterate, it is one way that children learn. But children also learn, and they need to be around friends, as we're noticing from the first one. Javier knew about Spider-Man, and it transferred, and it really was activated when he was around friends, and then it became something more in his language. So he was getting language from watching and seeing and thinking about Spider-Man. But when he's around his friends in the classroom, if they speak more proficient in English or Spanish, they're scaffolding his language. So he needs, children need all sorts of experiences. And so, just like everything in moderation. Because I don't study that, I never give recommendations about time. I know that American Academy of Pediatrics has concerns about that. But more so, I really also want us to think about, once again, what do we do with it? And also to go back to that idea about producers, because I can be on a computer or a TV and be doing something that's kind of like filling out a worksheet. And it doesn't take a whole lot of, I don't have to really produce anything. I just have to regurgitate stuff. That's a different deal than designing characters and making stories up about them and then sending it to friends and doing, those are really complex ideas. And so even though something is in a different mode on the TV or on the computer, always asking ourselves, and I think, how would this be different than a time test you would take in school? And if it's not, maybe we need to rethink that it's really not producing a whole lot. And what voice do the children have in creating things? So those are some of the things that I always ask people to kind of keep in mind. I think that's kind of what I have. And I know we have about 8 minutes left. So are there some things that I didn't address?
Do you think the technology that kids have today, I don't want to say makes them smarter, but makes them...
I heard two voices at once.
Oh yeah, I don't know. Okay. I was going to say, do you think the technology that kids have today makes them not smarter, but teaches them things younger and quicker than we were used to seeing kids in the past? It just seems like you were saying, the fact that a 2-year-old can use an iPad, and I've seen my nephew do it, and that they can at 18 months or 2 years old know how to find the right show that they want on the iPad or turn it on and off. I mean, the biggest thing we had to do was figure out how to turn on the TV, or we didn't even have remote controls. We had to go, turn the knob. So I just feel like kids these days, there's so much more technology and it's going so much faster. Is that true, or is that just my perception?
Well, I look at it as an anthropologist. And when saying that, I look at it as a tool. So there's a famous childhood anthropologist, Barbara Rogoff. And so she looked at, she has this fabulous book, The Cultural Nature of Human Development. And there's this picture in which there's a 1-year-old child in a tribe in Africa who has a machete, and he's 1. And my undergrads, oh, and I said, no, because that's part of the context in which he lives. He's been shown how to do it. He's safe with it. He knows what to do. And they still are on, ooh, I don't know about it. And I say that in the sense, it's all, do I think children are smarter? No. Do I think that they have different tools? Yes. Do I think that those tools afford different capabilities? Yes. Because our children probably didn't, may not be able to cut down something with a machete because they haven't been taught. So it's not that somebody is smarter than the other. They have different tools. They have tools, and depending on how much access they have to those tools, how much guidance from people that they, when we think about how children learn, it's from watching people. It's from being apprenticed. It's from seeing siblings and family members and other people. And they know from watching it that it's something valuable and desirable in their communities. And so that's how they learn how to do it. But it really is an arbitrary thing from an anthropo perspective, because children all over the world learn really valuable skills that a lot of children in the US do not. So I guess that's how I think about it. But are they amazing with those tools? Absolutely. Thank you for that question, though. That's awesome.
Melanie, did you have one last question? I know you.
It wasn't really a question. It was like I had an aha moment when you were telling about the story, how the story about Boots and Hannah Montana. I have a little one that is constantly drawing and making books up of all these characters that he watches from TV or YouTube, and I have no idea who they are. And my initial thought was, boy, he has a lot of screen time, not that he's being creative and he's being a producer. So it was like,
Well, thank you. That's wonderful. I have one of my doctoral students is doing research right now, and she has found, she's doing, another student is doing research in South Korea, and she's doing research on a couple of children that are from a specific immigrant population. And what she's finding is that in the preschools, the children, because they don't speak Korean and because of a lot of different things, they're outsiders. And so this little child doesn't feel particularly capable, but she watches him in different places, and there's a couple of games, she told me, one of Among Us, and the child knows about this. And then there's another one too, the sophistication, but when he draws and plays that in different spaces, it just like Javier, it invites the other children in, and they use different ways of engaging. So this child that is just on the periphery, not included, suddenly becomes included in the classroom. And when he becomes included in the classroom, he hears, right? If your concern would be language, he's, how do we learn? We learn by being around people. And so he's learning and being part of the community even more so. So it's been fascinating to see if we consider not just what he can't do, but what he can do, and how this might, and taking something that they love and scaffolding that into other things that meet your needs too. My other child had loved these little diminutive, I think they were called Shopkins in first grade. So there was a period of time in which every writing assignment was Shopkins but she created the most intricate stories. And as her teacher said, she needed her to learn how to write, a paragraph. She didn't really, her goal was to, from an educator standpoint, was to do that. And that's something that met both of their goals. So that's, so I'm glad that it spoke to you. And I love having these conversations and hearing about the experiences of preschool teachers too, because it's so important. Well, and if anything comes up, I have my email, or if there are any questions, and we have, I'm so excited that you all are in the PSU community. We have so many wonderful people, literacy researchers, especially in Dr. Patterson, but also we have more than a couple in curriculum and instruction that just do really great stuff with literacy, popular culture, and my thought was, in the question about, is it getting more? Well, with young children, and I think this goes back to my question of my research in the beginning, I knew that it's not often worth it to fight about the media with children, but to, what can we use it for and what do they use it for? And if we think about it as a tool, how do we use it effectively? But again, I've used the phrase, we don't swing open the doors and the gates and allow anything, but we also don't want to chain them shut. So when we open them, we also need to teach children how to be able to critically analyze things, because as we know, because the gates of media have been swung wide open with the internet, as everybody's mentioning, you can't always control what children watch, but you can equip them with the tools in how to really think about it.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just perfectly wrapped up everything. And I wanted to just draw people's attention. I put a link in the survey if you could just take a minute to complete that or open that up as you're heading out. But thank you so much for this session. I love that it was this small group and we got to really share and have those conversations. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope everybody has a wonderful night.
Yes, thank
Take
you
care.
all. And again,
Bye.
it'll be recorded, so we'll have it up if you want to share it out.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Bye. Good night.